And oh my god, we still have the movies to look back on too. Maybe that will be another video. We'll see what happens. Thomas the Tank Engine, the show, has been around since 1984. 37 years. And in those 37 years, it produced 24 seasons, a spin-off show, and a number of movies. 14 movies, in fact. And today, I'm going to revisit and rank all of them. This is a video I have wanted to do for ages now. There was always something so fun about the annual Thomas movie. As a fandom, it was always so exciting banding together on premiere day. The movies, whether good or not, and trust me, there's a lot of not good ones, set the stage for what was to be expected in the show that year. What characters and locations were going to be in the limelight. They don't do the annual movies anymore, unfortunately, and I do miss them. September each year was always an exciting time for this reason. So without further ado, let's get started. I don't count those big world special long episodes as movies, like the stupid flossing robot one, whatever the fuck it was called, so those are not included on this list. Cry about it. I have reviewed some of these movies in the past already, so fair warning, my opinions on some of them have changed a bit since then. Also, I don't think this really has to be said at this point, but everything here is just my opinion. None of the ratings I give here are hard fact, so don't treat them that way. Feel free to like a movie I dislike, or hate a movie I love. That's what the comment section is for. Okay, we got lots of ground to cover here. Let's start with the worst of the worst. Number 14. Is it even a contest? Misty Island Rescue is the worst Thomas movie ever. There is absolutely no other movie that deserves this spot more than this steaming pile of garbage. You know, there was a time, maybe 10 years ago, when I would have told you that I didn't think this was the worst one. But as you all know from my cringe-ass season 14 and 15 review videos, I was living in total denial back then. I rewatched this with friends not too long ago, and I was continually yelling at the screen the entire way through. Every decision and action every character makes in this makes no sense. The movie starts off somewhat decent. The first scene is cool, with the aerial shot of Harold approaching Thomas. And then it becomes bad like literally instantaneously after that. This movie totally sets up Harold as some sort of significant character, but don't worry, he's not. So this rescue center is being built and someone has to transport the wood from the docks to it. The ship that arrives has like 20,000 piles of logs on it, but then when it's loaded onto the trucks, it's reduced to like 3 tiny wagons. Like what? Where'd the rest of the wood go? Diesel wants to deliver the logs, but Thomas is just a total dick and tells Diesel he can't do it because he can never be useful.
I'm sure Sir Topham Hatt means a really useful steamy. You'll never be that.
Wow, racist much? So Diesel can't be useful because he's a diesel? Thomas, what about the other diesels you're friends with? Daisy, Rusty, how about Mavis, who works at the quarry on your branch line? How about Salty, who in 2 scenes later you're begging to tell you a story about whatever? Diesels can't be useful, Thomas? What is your damage? So we're like 5 minutes into the movie and it is established that there's probably going to be some sort of arc with Thomas and Diesel in this. Like Diesel is going to prove himself and Thomas is going to regret his hurtful words. Okay, whatever, that's fine. I'm sure this arc will be resolved later in the film. So Diesel decides to deliver the logs, but Thomas is like, no, Diesel can't do nice things, and chases him. Then Diesel loses the logs like an idiot and Thomas saves him. Okay, so no more logs, and apparently this is a huge problem. Now without these 3 wagons, the rescue center can't be finished on time. What about the 20,000 other piles that were on that ship we saw earlier? Where did all that go? Anyways, it doesn't matter because this isn't a plot point that's ever brought up again. You might as well forget the rescue center was even a thing at this point. So because Thomas rescued Diesel, he's getting sent to the mainland as a reward. Like on vacation or something? So going to work on the mainland is a reward. Really? I don't get it. But for some reason, he has to go there by ship? What? There's a bridge. There's a bridge to the mainland. They show a map of Sodor at one point, which clearly shows a bridge connection to the mainland. Why is he going by ship? But then they tell Thomas that the ship's deck is too full, so Thomas is like, oh, okay, I'll just go on that train raft that's conveniently right there and already attached to the ship. Wow, it's like they put that right there because it's going to be useful in the plot in the next scene or something. Huh. So he's loaded onto the raft, he's not strapped down, and he's still in steam? What? So the ship leaves, and in the next shot, we see the full ship with the completely exposed empty deck with plenty of space on it.
There's no room for you, Thomas.
Bullshit. Then the chain breaks because of course it does. Thomas gets lost at sea. Uh-oh. He whistles for help because he's still in steam? What is happening? Thomas drifts off to Misty Island. The raft amazingly drifts perfectly right into a rail dock, and Thomas just pops off it onto land like no big deal. He meets Bash, Dash, and Ferdinand, who all suck and are stupid and I hate them. They offer to help Thomas, but Thomas is like, no, f*** you, lol. Why? Why are you not accepting their help? But then he finds them again later on when he realizes that he can't do shit. And instead of helping him, they make Thomas do work for them for some reason? I don't know why Thomas works on this railway with them. It'd be one thing if they made him work for them in exchange for helping him taking him to Sodor or something, but that's not the case here? Okay, anyone want to attempt to explain the whole logging railway situation here? Misty Island is completely desolate. There are no towns, or houses, or roads, or people. Who does this logging railway serve? Everything is falling apart. Why is any of this machinery still in use? Who comes to operate the engines? Topham hears that Thomas is missing, so he looks to Whiff of all engines, to tell him about this abandoned tunnel that just so happens to go to Misty Island, where Thomas is. Gee, I wonder if this will be important later. But Topham doesn't even know Thomas is on Misty Island yet, so in the context of the scene, he's just asking Whiff to tell him about this random tunnel for literally no reason.
You can't build your office here, sir.
Oh, I guess he wants to build his office in there. In the tunnel. Because that makes sense. Great movie so far. Oh, and did I mention that the tunnel just so happens to be at the location of the new rescue center? Wow, how convenient. Why does Whiff of all characters know about this tunnel? Whiff, weren't you a new character like 2 seasons ago? The hell do you know about Sodor's history? Why isn't this Edward, or Salty, who knew all about Misty Island in that earlier scene? Also, Diesel is just completely forgotten in the film at this point. That whole conflict at the beginning they set up? Pointless. Diesel doesn't appear again in the film, at all. Diesel doesn't learn anything and basically just proved Thomas's hurtful remark right. He can't be useful because he's a stupid Diesel. What on earth kind of moral are they teaching here? There's such a racist implication, and I don't think the writer understood how damaging of a moral this little subplot presented. It would have been different if Diesel came back into the plot and proved Thomas wrong, but that never happens. Why was this even in the movie? So Thomas finds out about the tunnel to Sodor, so he has the logging locos go with him. Okay, just stop. I don't understand any of the characters' motivations here. So Thomas wants to go to Sodor with the wood, okay. But why are the logging locos going? Thomas is not forcing them. They could just not go. Like, it would make kind of some sense if it was a really long train and Thomas needed extra help, but they're only hauling like a wagon each. One of them isn't even pulling anything. Thomas can't handle 3 wagons on his own? Really? They say they'll run out of fuel if they go with him.
We don't have enough oil to puff to Sodor.
Okay, so don't go then. Who is forcing you guys? So they get stuck in the tunnel, the ground caves in, and all of them die. Good ending. The logging locos then all run out of fuel at the exact same time. They're all doomed. Yay! Then a hole opens up above them so Thomas can send out a smoke signal. Hooray! I love plot convenience. Back on Sodor at exactly the same time, the mist clears and Percy sees Misty Island in full view from Brendam Docks.
That must be Misty Island.
Have you all seriously never seen that giant island right there before? Are you kidding me? Has the weather never been clear at Brendam Docks before? Oh my god, I'm going to end myself. They see the smoke signals, Percy tells Topham, and Topham makes the absolute worst decision in the entirety of the movie. Literally, this moment in the film broke me. I became so pissed at this point that I could not contain myself. Sir Topham Hatt sends 3 of his engines to Misty Island on a goddamn boat. Why? Why? Why do that when there's a tunnel to the island? A tunnel you clearly knew about. Yeah, the tunnel is blocked, but no one on Sodor knew that. But then he decides to just send engines down the tunnel anyway? So why are you sending engines on the boat still? And why are you sending 3 of them? Also, why are you sending engines to the island when there is a rescue team for this exact kind of scenario that was introduced earlier? One of which is a boat that can cross the water to the island in 10 minutes, and another that is a helicopter that can fly to it in 2 minutes. Why did the movie set up a whole rescue center and a rescue team only to not use them in the scene where they go and rescue someone? I can't even finish this movie. My vocal cords are straining right now. Misty Island Rescue is the worst piece of trash this franchise has ever produced. I cannot believe I used to think this was a passable film. Every decision is awful. Every character is stupid and unlikable. Thomas is just an awful, selfish person throughout, and Sir Topham Hatt is probably the dumbest motherfucker in the whole movie. You know this movie is bad when the goddamn logging locals are the most likable characters in it. And I hate them. And to top it all off, you can't even enjoy it for how stupid it is, because the dialogue is degrading. For some reason, someone thought it was a good idea to have Thomas be Dr. Seuss and make everything rhyme.
That's why they'll come soon. We'll be safe and sound. It won't be long now. I know we'll be found. One biff, one bash, and there's never a crash.
Diesels are no good, the Steamies always say. But I'll show them they're wrong by the end of the day.
I make good decisions, that's what I was told. I will not be fearful, I'll be brave and bold.
My name's Kevin. Just give me a call. Whatever you need, I'll take care of it all.
Shut up! Stop it! All that aside, the absolute worst thing about Misty Island Rescue is its morals. What on earth were the lessons of this film? What were kids watching supposed to take away from this? Thomas acts like a complete dick throughout the whole thing and receives no repercussion for his actions, and everything just works out fine for him. Like, what was the message here? It's okay to act stupid and mean and put your friends in danger, as long as you sound confident when you talk? And then we have the Diesel subplot, which was abysmal. There was no conclusion to it, only for it to end abruptly and prove Thomas's borderline racist comment that Diesel can never be useful because he's not a steam engine. What was the moral there? There are some things they could have done to fix the narrative of this movie. Like, make Thomas get a big head from saving Diesel, and that's why he's an ass throughout the film, only to be humbled later when he makes a huge mistake. Also, have Diesel more active in the plot. Have him join the search to save Thomas. Remove Whiff from the movie altogether, you don't need him, and have Diesel and Percy be the ones to find him in the tunnel. And then Thomas has a moment of, wow, you came to save me, Diesel? After I was so rude to you? And Diesel's like, you saved me, now we're even. And then Thomas later takes back his hurtful comments he made earlier after everything is settled. Or maybe you just don't even have the Diesel plot in the movie at all, and come up with some other reason why Thomas goes to the mainland. Also, have your rescue team play a bigger part in the rescue scene of the movie. Have Topham fly to Misty Island and Harold and locate the smoke signals from the air or something. It's like all the pieces for a cohesive narrative are right there, but they just don't use them. I'm wasting my breath, though, even trying to fix this mess. Because the whole concept of the physical Misty Island itself is so broken that there's no way to make any logical sense of it. The Big World Big Adventures movie was definitely a low point, but I could at least sit through that. Misty Island Rescue was the most degrading experience of all the movies on this list. It insults its audience's intelligence. Absolutely the worst one of them all, and nothing tops it. F. Moving on. Number 13. Day of the Diesels is not much better. Okay, that's a bit harsh. Day of the Diesels is not a good movie. It sucks, in fact. But it is slightly better than Misty Island. Simply because the awful rhyming dialogue is written of.
But you didn't! You tricked me! Where is it now? It's an emergency!
Mostly. Before I get into the many problems of this movie, I do want to go over some positives, because unlike Misty Island, there actually are some here. First is, I like that Percy is the main character. For the first time, Thomas is a secondary while Percy takes the spotlight. I don't like Percy in this movie, he's incredibly stupid, but that change-up was nice. Second is, I like Diesel in this. He actually feels like how Diesel is supposed to be written, being manipulative and getting Percy on his good side to aid him in a much bigger scheme. His scenes with Percy in the first act were honestly the parts of the movie I liked the best. And lastly, I like this movie's take on Diesel 10. Nothing tops the comical, ruthless Diesel 10 in Magic Railroad, of course. That is the definitive interpretation that everyone loves. But this take is interesting too. He's not funny and bombastic here. He's very quiet and thoughtful, speaking slowly and intelligently. He's the mob boss that pulls all the strings behind the scenes in the shadows. It's very Sideshow Bob-esque. It's fun. That's about it for positives though, because the rest of the movie is doo-doo. Unlike Misty Island, which was so awful I was screaming at it the whole time, Day of the Diesels is just boring. The whole movie is Percy going back and forth between the steam engines and the diesels. Back and forth, back and forth. Nothing really happens. It's all building up to this grand plan Diesel 10 has that for some reason he needs Percy for. Then the grand plan finally happens and it's just the dumbest thing ever. Diesel 10's plan was to take over the steamworks just so the diesels could goof around in it? I don't get it. Okay, so why did they need Percy to do this? They all went to the steamworks when no one was there. What, did they need Percy to unlock the door for them or something? They couldn't have taken it over by themselves? The diesels wanted the steamworks because their diesel works was trashed. So when they get the steamworks, they trash it? I seriously don't get it. The bigger overarching problem with the movie is, again, the morals. Again, we come back to Thomas being a racist bigot again. At the beginning, Thomas tells Percy to not talk to diesels because they're all devious and will play him, painting the diesels in a bad light. Only for the diesels to do just that to Percy and prove Thomas's comments totally right again. So again, what is the moral here? That people unlike us are all bad, so don't trust them? The movie went out of its way to include Mavis and Salty in a scene, who are two very nice diesels. What about them? Do you think they wanted to trash the steamworks? Of course not. These movies exist in such an extremist universe. Steam engines are all good no matter what, and diesels are all bad always. There's like no middle ground. Clearly, they were trying to go for this big steam versus diesel conflict in this movie, which of course is a kid-friendly allegory for racism, but the message lands flat on its face. There is no big putting differences aside and working together realization in the film. They all only work together at the very end in like the last 2 minutes because Topham yelled at them and told them to. None of them actively wanted to. It's a plot that's been done to death before in the show already, and in another movie. I can't believe I'm singing the praises of Calling All Engines here, because that movie is also a snorefest, but it handled the two groups hate each other and then come together conflicts so much more tastefully. It's just so clunky and extremist here. I genuinely don't think they had any sort of plan when putting this together. This was literally just a vehicle to market Diesel 10 again. That's all this was. That was the single priority. The actual plot and structure did not matter in the slightest. They just slapped something together with Diesel 10 in it, threw in the 2 new fire engine toys or whatever they had to market that year, and copy and pasted some steam versus diesel conflict thing they've already done before. There was absolutely no effort put into this. It's a tired story we've already seen before, it has an overall harmful message, and it's just boring. A lot of work needed to be done here. F. F plus? No, F. Moving on. Number 12. Considering how much I trashed the entire Bwubba era of Thomas, I bet a lot of you thought this would be the bottom pick. It's not, but don't worry, it's still firmly in the bad section of this list. I don't think this is the worst movie of the franchise, as shocking as that sounds. It's definitely more watchable than the previous two, and actually has a pretty cohesive narrative. I can at least sit through this without yelling at the screen every 4 seconds. However, there are many problems, many of which I have already gone through in depth before. My main problem with the Bwubba movie is that it just tries to do too much, while at the same time does nothing. What kind of a review is that, you ask? Well, let me explain. I think the overall concept could have been something really fun. The plot of this is Thomas goes on an adventure that takes him around the world. In theory, this sounds really fun. Thomas going on a worldwide tour that sets up the next season? That's exciting. How is it going to work? Is Topham going to take Thomas around the world to show off the engine to different countries? Or is it like a series of railway shows that Thomas is going to attend? No. Instead, Thomas just somehow leaves on his own and follows a race car around. Oh, it's just so stupid. Any ounce of realism this story could have had is thrown out the window as soon as Thomas leaves Sodor, and from that point on, the movie becomes boring. Once he's in these countries, nothing happens. Such a great big deal is made about Thomas going missing, and then when he comes back, he just gets a big return welcome? Are you all forgetting that Thomas basically just abandoned you all and left you all to do his work while he gallivanted off on a vacation? I'd be pissed if I were these guys. I wouldn't be welcoming him back with open arms. Thomas gets like no repercussions for his actions here. It just goes to show that the writers didn't actually care how Thomas left Sodor to get to the countries. He just needed to leave. So write whatever. Whatever, sure, he hops on a ship and just leaves, why not? As long as he's in the first country by the 10-minute mark, doesn't matter what happens. F*** Sodor, right? Who cares? But then once we're in the countries, what even happens? Thomas pulls trains from one city to another, and he meets Nia and Ace on the way. They don't really use the cultures or the settings of these countries to their advantage. Each country is visually just the stereotype of the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of that country. Africa is just a giant desert with nothing in it. Brazil is just a rainforest with nothing in it. America is just a very stereotypical Wild West setting with nothing in it. This movie is so dull visually. Is anyone else bored yet? I don't know, guys. I really don't like this movie. You know, there are a couple movies on this list that I didn't care much for before, but then on rewatch for this, I was delighted that I found a few new things in them that I actually appreciate. That is not the case here. This movie just gets worse every time I rewatch it. It sucks. There are very, very few positives, though. I want to talk about Ace the race car for a sec here, because I totally glossed over him in the Bwubba video. I'm not a fan of his design, but I don't hate this character. And I actually kind of like what he represents in the narrative. He's a bad influence on Thomas. It's obvious to the audience, but not to him. And throughout, Thomas has an arc. He learns Ace is no good. I actually really like that Ace doesn't get a big end or any sort of redemption. Thomas just abandons him. He gets him where he needs to go, then he says goodbye, and he just leaves him. There is no satisfying conclusion, because sometimes in life, not everyone gets a proper send-off, or deserves a proper send-off. It's a good example of how kids should deal with bad influences in real life, so it's a story beat that I think hits pretty well. If I'm being honest, this Lightning McQueen knockoff, that looks nothing like a Thomas character, was the best part of this movie. The other big new character in this was Nia, and I think Nia was handled okay in this. She's not amazing or anything, she's a pretty generic nice character. There is some interesting culture stuff that's touched on with her though, like how she greets her friends. I liked that. She's fine in the movie. She's not anything special, but I don't hate her. How she's handled in the show, however, is a totally different discussion, of which I've already gone into before. Bwubba is a movie that tries to do way too much and strays too far from what Thomas is supposed to be about. The realism factor is not present at all in this, when it totally could have been. It feels so rushed, too, as if the weird unfinished animation wasn't already an indicator of that. They cut the previous season short so they could finish this and pump this out and have it be the big launching product for the show's rebrand that year, only for it to not be easily available anywhere. It didn't come out on DVD in the States in its launch year, it wasn't on Netflix, I think it only aired on TV like once, and could be purchased on like iTunes or something, and that was it. For this huge movie they wanted all eyes on to kickstart the all-new series, Mattel really dropped the ball on the marketing for this thing. So ultimately, it's a movie that didn't please anyone. It wasn't made for fans, so they didn't like it. It was made to appeal to the lowest common denominator kids. But then they couldn't even see it because they didn't market it right. So it ended up being a movie for nobody that nobody saw. It and the seasons it set up just a big ol' waste of time. Ironically, for what is literally Thomas's biggest adventure ever, this didn't feel big or grand at all. This movie was just so unspecial and so off the mark of what made Thomas so unique in the first place. There's some good moments in it sprinkled here and there, sure, but overall it was just a big ol' boring dud, and now a permanent stain on the series' legacy of the worst mistake Mattel ever made with this show. This just wasn't Thomas, and some may argue that makes it the worst one of all on this list. D-. Number 11. What is there even to say about Calling All Engines? This is the weirdest movie on this list because it doesn't even feel like a movie. It feels more like a very long episode. That's basically what it is. Hell, the title sequence is just the standard one from the show. And a third of the runtime are those awful learning segments for babies that you'd only watch if you watch the regular episodes on TV. So as a result, Calling All Engines is just some weird episode wannabe movie hybrid thing. I don't hate it though. My biggest gripe with it are those learning segments. If all that crap was stripped out and this whole thing was just like a slick 40-ish minutes, I would enjoy this a lot more. For what it's worth, there are some pretty cool model sequences in this thing. The whole storm scene is so brutal. The suspension bridge collapse is the best part of the whole thing, in my opinion. Even as a kid, I didn't care for the movie, but that scene in particular stuck out to me. The fact it's an actual physical model breaking apart and likely all done in a single take is pretty amazing. CGI makes for pretty scenes, absolutely, but physical models like this will always be more impressive. I just briefly mentioned this, but I do want to give some praise to how the Diesel and Steamy conflict is handled in this. Unlike Day of the Diesels, which paints one side in a bad light and the other in a good light with no middle ground, Calling All Engines makes a point of showing that both sides are useful, but also just as bad as the other. They'll show the Diesels being pricks to the steam engines, but then later show the steam engines will also stoop to the same lows and be just as bad as them. I really like this, because it doesn't put one above the other. They're all equal and on a level playing field. It all culminates to a boiling point where they realize they need to put their differences aside if they want to get the airport or whatever needed to be built finished. Nice Diesels like Rusty and Mavis were used as good median characters in this. These streaks of gray and this black and white conflict make the overall plot more interesting, with more to chew on. There are steam engines that are just as bad as the worst Diesels, and Diesels that are just as nice, if not nicer, than the nicest steam engines. So I know I'm coming off as singing the praises of this movie, but it is low on this list for a reason. The model stuff is always cool to look at, the choice of character props that appear is pretty fun, and the conflict and message is handled well for the most part. But overall, Calling All Engines is a snore fest. It is a very boring movie. The fast-paced action sequences are all fun, but you have to sit through so many boring dialogue scenes and stupid learning segments that talk down to babies that you just don't care about any of it. I'd love to rank this without the learning segments included, but HIT made the stupid decision to have them be a part of the movie, so they are a part of the overall experience and affect its ranking. And man, they really bring it down. I mean, I don't know how I can rank a movie that is clearly aimed at babies any higher on this list. A slick 30-minute or so supercut of this with all the boring, pointless stuff cut out would rank higher, I think. It's overall below average, but it's not terrible. I'd say this is the first okay movie on this list. C-, but like a 70% C-, right on the line of bad and okay. Number 10. Everyone and their grandma has asked me to talk about this godforsaken movie for ages. And you know what? Maybe I will do a full analyzation of this someday, talking about the director's cut, etc. But for now, I'll give you a brief summary of just about how I feel about Thomas and the Magic Railroad. I do not like this movie. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have childhood nostalgia for it, because I absolutely do. I was a little kid when this movie came out, and I thought it was the greatest thing ever at the time. I have very clear memories of going to see this in the theater with my family, and then going to Toys R Us afterward and getting an Ertl Diesel 10. But I don't want nostalgia to blind me here, because this movie is so convoluted. The plot is so hard to follow. There are like 4 central characters they have to set up, all of which are humans that we have never seen in Thomas before. You got Mr. Conductor, who is the closest to what I can call our main character. You got his cousin Junior, you got the girl named Lily, and her grandpa Burnett Stone. Mr. Conductor comes to Sodor to look after the railway while Sir Topham Hatt is on vacation. And for some reason, he looks like a normal human and not a wooden figure. But Topham and his wife are still wooden figures. Right. Mr. C is like a foot tall in the real human world, but when he's on Sodor, he's normal sized. Is this supposed to be like an in-joke to the engines being Gauge 1 models? I don't know. But all the regular humans are normal sized on Sodor too. I have no idea how this works. It's not explained. Mr. C comes to Sodor using magic gold dust. But when he gets to Sodor, his gold dust goes bye-bye, so he needs more. So he phones Junior to bring him more while he tries to find out just what the heck is happening. Meanwhile, we got Lily going to visit her grandpa who she hasn't seen in years.
But for some reason, she just lets some random dog guide her onto the wrong train.
Then she gets lost on the way and conveniently ends up at Shining Time, where Junior is getting Mr. C's gold dust. Lily's grandpa, Burnett, owns a broken down engine called Lady, who ran a magic LSD drug trip railroad through the 12th dimension, I guess, to the island of Sodor. Lady is the source of the gold dust, but when she's not running, the gold dust isn't producing. So they all gotta get Lady running so they can get their gold dust back. Oh, and all the while, there's an evil Diesel called Diesel 10, whose main goal is to destroy Lady once and for all. He is also conveniently on Sodor at the same time this is all going down. Anyone else confused at what's happening? This is the plot. This overly complicated nonsense is the plot of this Thomas movie. Have you noticed something though? Something odd about that summary? Yeah, Thomas isn't mentioned in it. Thomas the Tank Engine is inconsequential to the plot of this movie. He's not even the main character. The main character is Mr. Conductor. And don't get me wrong, Alec Baldwin is super entertaining in this.
Beach, that's it! That's it!
But no one came to this wanting to see him. No one came to this movie expecting to see some sappy, depressing drama with magic humans they don't know. They came to see the blue train with a face from the show have an adventure, which they only really get in the last 15 minutes. There are just so many problems here. I can't list all of them, but I'm going to tell you the one that I think destroys the movie the most. And it's the magic element. Thomas was held in such a high regard with his fans and the general public because of how realistic it once was. This is why kids were drawn to it, why we as fans still like it all these years after childhood. We like the smiling face trains, of course, but it was the realistic universe they lived in that made them so memorable. The darker stories influenced by real-life events are the ones that everyone remembers the most. Sodor seemed like a real place in the world that we could go and visit. So when this movie comes along and tells us the engines are all alive because of a magic engine living in the 12th dimension giving them all life, and Sodor is a magical land that one can only get to using gold dust or a magic railway, and basically exists in some bubble separate from the real world, that connection to what made Thomas so unique is broken. Now nothing matters, because it's just all magic. What, doesn't make sense? Well, that's okay, just explain it away with magic. Doesn't matter. Thankfully, the movie overall is apparently not canon. At least it doesn't seem like it is. Nothing in the movie is ever mentioned again. The show basically ignores it. Mr. C and Lily and the Magic Railroad and the Gold Dust are all never a thing at all after this. Season 6 came out after this, and it basically just ignored the movie completely. Back to business as usual. I don't blame them. I would have done the same thing in that position. But Magic Railroad's stain was kinda forever on it. The general perception of Thomas was totally different after this, as now a dumb kid show where the trains talk because magic. I honestly want to say this is an awful movie and rank it lower, but I just can't. It doesn't feel right to. This is so not on the same par as Misty Island Rescue. Misty Island and Day of the Diesels and Bwubba all feel like no one gave a shit. That's not the case here. There was a clear effort with Magic Railroad. This was Britt Allcroft's passion project. Everything it does is nonsensical, but it doesn't feel like a cheap cash grab. Even though it is bad and convoluted and it has very little Thomas in it, the Thomas stuff that is in it is so right. They nail the feel of Thomas in this, and I think that's why so many people defend it. This is the only movie on this list that comes from those cherished classic years of Thomas, from the same people who made the show in the first place. And boy oh boy, is the classic feel of Thomas present here. I love how comfy everything looks. Seeing the props we all know so well on movie film is just so satisfying. From that to the almost perfect voice cast,
And I'm a big blue engine who knows everything.
Bossy sprockets!
To the true personalities of the characters being present.
Oh, Diesel won't bother with an old engine like me. He thinks I'm really useless.
To the score itself. All of the actual Thomas stuff in this movie is just so right. The Really Useful Engine musical number still hits home for me to this day. The Adventure Begins outdid itself with its take on the song, but Magic Railroad's version will always be my favorite.
He's the really useful engine we adore.
And that's why I officially rank this as an okay movie on this list, despite not liking it. If the actual Thomas stuff in this was the focus of the film, as it should have been, without all the magic crap and stupid, endless, nonsensical human drama, this would have been so much better and probably received better critically. The general public did not like this movie, and it's pretty clear why. I do not know what Britt Allcroft was on when she made this, but at least she made a pretty movie that's nice to look at. I'm also going to give Magic Railroad a C-. It just doesn't feel right to go lower than that. Number 9. I feel like The Great Race and I have a very turbulent relationship. Every time I rewatch this, I walk away with a different opinion on it. On this latest rewatch, I came out thinking it was a little better than I remembered, but still leaving a lot to be desired. The Great Race's biggest crime is having a really great concept that was executed not very well, and for that I find this movie frustrating. So in this movie, a big railway show is happening on the mainland, and Thomas desperately wants to be a part of it. They clearly had a massive vision when they pitched this. They wanted to have a huge event that features engines from all around the world. The opportunities for stories and character interactions seems endless. However, it takes 2/3 of the movie to get to the show itself. The 2/3 on Sodor are so boring and played out. Thomas is the main character, and we follow his plight to get selected by Topham to go. We've seen Thomas go through this same struggle a million times in random episodes before. He wants to be faster, he wants to be stronger, etc. Nothing about this plot is movie-worthy. And then when they get to the railway show, they sort of breeze through it. All the events we wanted to see are rushed through. The titular Great Race competition only lasts like 3 minutes, and it has no bearing on the plot at all. So as a result, the big event of this movie didn't really feel all that big. I understand you have to have the build-up to the show. You can't just have the show happen right away. But I feel like they spent way too much time showing Thomas dicking around on Sodor. They didn't strike the right balance. There's also a subplot with Diesel, complete with his own musical number, that is ultimately a waste of time. They spent so much time on this, only for it to amount causing a crash and preventing Thomas from going to the show. But that doesn't even matter, because Thomas is fixed in like 5 minutes and goes off to the show anyway. So all this time we spent with Diesel was ultimately for nothing. After the crash, he's just completely forgotten about and doesn't appear again until the end credits. What is it with these movies having Diesel subplots in their beginning acts and then abandoning them halfway through? This is like the 3rd time they've done this. I said a long time ago that Gordon should have been the main character of this movie, and I still stand by that. He's the one that goes through the most change and has the most interesting story arc. It kind of feels like that's what they wanted to do, but had to shaft it to a B-plot because of what I assume was corporate meddling. If Brenner and McHugh and whoever else had their way, I bet they would have made this a Gordon story. For all its bad stuff though, I do think there is a lot of redeemable stuff here too. I love the concept. When they actually get to the railway show, the stuff that happens here is fun and exciting, it's just rushed. I think the movie also has the best songs of all the musicals on this list. They're all so catchy. I haven't watched this movie in at least 3 years, and yet I remembered all the words to Will You Won't You as it played. And of course, how can I talk about this movie without mentioning Flying Scotsman? Sadly, he's just a minor, sort of tertiary character in this, but man, everything with him in this is excellent.
I'm called the Shooting Star now. Don't be ridiculous.
I love the sibling rivalry between him and Gordon. I love his celebrity showman attitude. I love his big debut scene at the beginning. I really wish this was a Gordon movie so we could have seen more with him. Featuring him in this movie the same year the real Flying Scotsman returned to Steam was a great marketing opportunity, and they totally took advantage of it. Unfortunately, this movie was the beginning of the downfall of the Brenner era. That corporate mandated side of the movie was very prevalent, where it was obvious certain things had to happen because Mattel demanded it. There had to be a scene where Thomas jumps the drawbridge so they could sell some stunt playset. Everyone's favorite character, Philip, had to be in this because he was a new toy that year. They had to have a Diesel subplot so they could sell some dumb 3-pack no one wanted. Most of the international characters all have to say their names at one point so they could sell toys of them with their names on the box, etc. I think this was the first time since Mattel took over that Thomas really felt like it was owned by a corporation, if you know what I mean. And it only got worse as it went on. Sadly, this movie left a lot to be desired, but I wouldn't say it was a bad movie. All the elements to create something really great were there, they just didn't completely deliver. I find The Great Race overall a frustrating movie with a lot of good things in it. It's not bad, it's just unsatisfying. I'm putting it squarely right in the middle of the okay movies on this list. C. Number 8. King of the Railway is probably the movie with the least I have to say about. This movie sort of just exists. It's not bad by any means, but it doesn't do anything really exceptional either. It's literally right in the middle. It has an incredibly messy plot. There isn't really one. There's not even a solid main character. Sometimes it's Thomas, sometimes it's Stephen, sometimes it's the Earl himself. This is more like 4 episodes with a related theme of a castle being restored, all stitched together. I describe King of the Railway as things happening on Sodor this week, the movie. The what I can call main plot is about Thomas, Percy, and James helping to rebuild the castle. And I don't like the sort of mystery element they try to spin with it. The movie keeps trying to build up to this point where the Earl reveals what his big plan is. And then when he reveals it,
I am reopening Ulfstead Castle to the public.
My reaction is like, duh? Was it not obvious that that's what he was doing from day one? Regardless, I find this movie fun to revisit from time to time. This was the first full production with Andrew Brenner, Ian McHugh, that whole team in charge. It's so neat seeing the stuff they attempted to fix right away, like Henry's special coal retcon.
Don't tell me he needs special coal again.
No, Gordon. That was fixed years ago.
Yeah, it is a bunch of random plots strung together, but it's all plots that I like at least, and I think are all true to the characters. All of the lore stuff is neat too. A lot of the history and lore here is pulled straight from the Island of Sodor book, like the exposition with King Godred, the history of Ulfstead Castle, the rolling bridge to the mainland, and Sir Robert Norrby himself. Not to mention the real-life history that's tied in as well. I really like that sequence of Stephen explaining the Rainhill trials to the others. That was so cool. Stephen in general is a great character, with some great dialogue.
But I've seen people do all sorts of things that don't make any sense. Or maybe he wants to make tea in my boiler.
I'm glad he stuck around in the show after this movie. He feels like a legit Thomas character. He has a certain energy to him that's just not present in other characters. This is also just a little something I noticed on my latest rewatch that I wanted to bring up. In the scene when Thomas is telling the others about Stephen, he brings up that Stephen is the oldest engine design he's ever seen. Immediately after that's said, the first 2 engines that are excited to see him are Edward and Emily.
I'd like to see him for myself.
So would I.
This is me getting so technical, I know, but Edward and Emily are both old designs themselves. The only engines there that are also 19th century locomotives. I like to think that they were thrilled by the idea of a new 19th century engine on Sodor. I have no idea if this was intentional or just a happy coincidence, but I thought it was neat. Unlike The Great Race, King of the Railway actually did feel like a big event was occurring. While it doesn't do anything particularly noteworthy, this was a really energetic kickoff to the Brenner era of Thomas. It ain't a great movie by any means, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't like it or find it charming. The charm of Stephen's character alone goes a long way. I'll place it at the top of the okay movies. C+. Let's move on to the good ones. Number 7. Journey Beyond Sodor was a movie clearly based on a vision the writers had, and they, for the most part, followed through on it with little compromise. They wanted to do an epic Prison Break type of story, and they delivered just that. I said this in my old review of this before, but it's a movie that knew what it wanted to be and wasn't compromised by corporate meddling as much as The Great Race was. And for that, I respect it. It is also the only movie on this list that I still feel pretty much the same about from the first time I watched it. 2017 me must have been pretty aligned with 2021 me, so basically what I say here is just going to be a big repeat of my Journey Beyond Soda review. I like to watch this thing with it being the finale to CGI Thomas in mind, and I enjoyed a lot more like that. In a lot of ways, this movie really did feel like a finale, with the main characters all singing together at the end, the one shot in Thomas's solo where every character in the show appears, and the overall theme of wanting to go home and be with family. This really was, in a lot of ways, the big final hurrah for the Brenner era of Thomas before the big Bwubba changes happened. I like the darker tone of this movie, I really love the score, I love how prominent a role the trucks of all characters play in this, but undeniably the best thing in the movie is James. James ranges from being the funniest guy in the movie to the only one with a functioning brain at times. The two best scenes in the movie are both with him. I love the scene of him talking to the Contempt mainland diesels who just want their lives to end. And I love the scene of him breaking the fourth wall in the steelworks. He is such an audience standing character here. I love it. The experimental engines don't really work for me. I get Bash, Dash, and Ferdinand vibes from them, and no one liked them. I kinda get what they were trying to go for with them, that no matter what your handicap is, there is always some way for you to be useful. But the message gets a little muddied when you consider that Hurricane is also an experimental, and he works just fine. Merlin was their standout character, and I like him a lot. He was the only newbie in the whole movie whose whole character was actually inspired by something in real life. And he was the only experimental the movie needed, really. His whole gimmick was that he was a good hider. Remove the other two and just have Merlin be this engine Thomas comes across on his travels, and he helps aid him and James in their escape. And then have Merlin just come back to Sodor with them or something, I don't know. I think the ending is the worst part of the whole film. It's rushed and it has a mixed message. What Hurricane and Frankie did to Thomas in this was awful. They should have been punished for it. I think an ending where the villains get their just dues and the heroes escape would have been so much more satisfying, and appropriate for what is supposed to be a prison break adventure film. This forced quickly make the bad guys sympathetic because kids movie crap at the end really brings it down. Lost Treasure had the balls to show Sailor John getting arrested for his actions. They should have done something similar here if they really wanted to stick to the darker tone they set up. I will also never get used to the body gestures. This was the first movie to feature that, and they go really overboard with it in scenes. What bugs me even more is that it's inconsistent. Sometimes the engines are static, as per normal, and then sometimes they're bending almost sideways. I do not like it. No doubt this was due to the 11th hour changes prior to release. This movie has a bit of a weird history that I still don't think we have the full story of. Somehow along the way, this movie got lost in the shuffle and then sandwiched in the middle of the previous era and the Bwubba stuff, and it was pretty quickly forgotten about the next year. I guess we'll never know the full story of exactly what went down during production of this and Bwubba, but it makes Journey Beyond Sodor a bit of a weird enigma. All of these gripes I have with it aside, I think Journey Beyond Sodor is a pretty enjoyable Thomas movie, with a rather unique vision that wasn't too compromised. There are things in it that I don't like, especially the ending, but I still think it's a fun ride. It was a totally new concept for a Thomas film, and I liked that they tried some new things with it. Of all the Thomas biggest adventure gimmicks they've done, this one actually felt like the biggest he's had. Journey Beyond rides the border of okay and good for me. It depends on my mood, I guess. C+, B-. It's right on the line. Number 6. I feel like Hero of the Rails has gotten a lot of newfound love lately on Twitter, and I think it's deserved. This was the very first all CGI production. This was the first time a lot of us saw the characters we all know so well in full CGI. I remember when this movie came out and someone uploaded the opening scene onto YouTube. Seeing the characters in full CGI with their own voices, with the mouths moving, was so surreal. And I was so excited to go buy this thing after school the next day. I still to this day think some of the voice cast choices were weird, particularly Henry and Toby in the US dub.
bubbling boilers!
Neither of those have really grown on me, even after all these years. The plot of this movie is that Thomas discovers an old dilapidated engine in the woods and tries to repair him in secret without the villainous Spencer finding out. This movie introduces Hero, and I think Hero is a very interesting character. He's very observant and notices things about the characters that even the audience wouldn't think about.
When Gordon smiles, it changes his whole face. It is most interesting.
He's voiced by Togo Igawa, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who delivers a really natural sounding performance. He doesn't sound like he's putting on a voice or trying too hard, and as a result, Hero feels very genuine. It just goes to show how much a voice actor actually brings to a character. Victor is also great, and I really like the Steamworks. All this new stuff the movie introduced felt so right for the Thomas universe, which was so refreshing coming right off the later model seasons where mostly all of the new stuff introduced was really unimportant and gimmicky.
I'm Billy!
Spencer is the film's antagonist, and he absolutely steals the show. This really was his coming out moment in the series as a character. I love Spencer. I think he fits so naturally in the Thomas universe, and this movie gives us so much awesome Spencer material. Until this point, he was always a secondary character, usually pinned up with a main character like Gordon and Thomas. This time around, Spencer takes on a main role, and his dastardly side is on full display here. He really is a villainous, terrible dude when he's pushed to his limit, and I'm all here for it. It's so nice when they dare to step away from the typical nice guy personas they give everyone and decide to change things up a little bit. I'll admit that I don't totally understand what Spencer's motives were for wanting Hero scrapped. I guess it was just because he didn't like being shown up by Thomas, and since Hero was something Thomas held dear, he wanted him destroyed to hurt Thomas? It's a little thin, but his mad rage to finish Hero was fun to watch regardless. I like that the main cast worked together as a unit in this. I love the scene where Spencer is putting down Thomas and immediately everyone jumps in to defend Thomas.
Thomas is not a toy.
Despite all their banter and disagreements, these characters make up a family, and they really feel like one in this movie. I remember first watching this and being very happy with it, totally excited for the CGI seasons to come, only to watch season 13 and becoming instantly disappointed realizing that the high quality of Hero of the Rails was probably going to be a one-off thing. My absolute biggest gripe with the movie is that the narrator never shuts up. Hero of the Rails totally suffers from the overuse of narration common to this era. The narrator just won't stop talking.
Spencer smiled as he slid away. Spencer steamed and smiled. He raced and he roared. Thomas's wheels started to whir and to wobble. He flew faster and faster down the hill. Thomas laughed. He liked Victor. Thomas looked at his best friend. He always told Percy everything. Spencer chuffed on.
Oh my god, shut up! Did that forward sentence really add anything to the scene? The engines can talk themselves now. Let them speak. As a result, the movie is a little unengaging at times. A guy can only take so much Michael Brandon before he has to pause it. I'd love to see an edit of this movie with the narrator's role cut down severely. The other big thing that I take issue with is Hero's backstory. I like that he has one, and it's what makes him so interesting, but as a longtime fan, retconning the history of Sodor to make Hero the first engine on the island really rubs me the wrong way. I think there's something to be said about sticking to canon in a long-running series. Changing things for the hell of it to suit whatever thing you want to make now is just a lazy cop-out excuse in my opinion. If something's been around long enough and has established lore and a big fan following, you need to respect that. If it doesn't work within canon, then make it work within canon. Rewrite it, get clever. Hero of the Rails is one of the bigger factors why I consider the CGI seasons their own canon from the previous era. In a weird way, I kinda take them having this huge retcon be present in the first ever CGI production was them sort of declaring, this is an all new timeline. We're gonna do our own thing from here on out. CGI Thomas is its own beast, baby. Hope you're ready. Regardless, for the first ever full CGI production out of the gate, I think they did a really solid job with this. Hero of the Rails, despite some of those gripes that I have, is a good Thomas movie. Solid is the word I would use to describe this. A solid B. Number 5. The Great Discovery is wonderful. This was the final all-model production of Thomas, and they really went all out with it. They built so many new props, used as many characters as they could, including all of the pack and all of the narrow gauge engines. Wow. That montage towards the end where every character shouts the news of Thomas being found is just so goddamn great. They really brought everyone out for it. If anything, I really liked The Great Discovery for just how much of a celebration of props this was. This was the last all-model production. They had every reason to just phone this one in and call it a day. But nope, they took this as an opportunity to continue to world build and expand the island of Sodor, even though it was at the very end. Great Waterton is a neat location. The idea of an old mining town that was long ago abandoned is such a fun one, and fills in those empty spots on the map that have never been touched before. This movie is totally unique for its voice talent. They got Mr. James Bond himself, Pierce Brosnan, to narrate this. And I gotta say, I really like him as a narrator. He offered a really unique take on the storytelling. He narrates this as if he's reading a bedtime story to his kid.
I basically tell the story as if I was talking to my own son or daughter, who's 4 or 5. And you try to have as much of an intimate relationship with your voice and the person or the people, the children, the parents who are listening to you.
I love his subtle voice inflections for each character, like how he makes James sound sort of snooty and uppity.
He's called Stanley. He's very friendly. Everyone likes him.
He does talk a bit too slow for my liking though, and I wish he had a little bit more urgency in his voice to speed up the pacing of some scenes. Even so, he was still a nice change of pace from Michael Brandon and Michael Angelis, who, by this point, let's all admit, we were all getting sick of.
I'm tired.
It's a shame Pierce didn't stay on as the permanent narrator following this, but his inclusion here makes the movie all the more unique. Thomas himself was also a nice change of pace. I really like how Thomas is used in this movie. He actually feels like Thomas, as he should be portrayed, cheeky and self-assured, and when he feels threatened by a new engine, he plays a nasty trick on him. The plan of course backfires, in typical Thomas fashion. I love that the prickly side of Thomas is present here. In most of the later model seasons, Thomas is portrayed as too nice all the time. I'm glad they went back to basics a bit and let all sides of his character shine here. If I am to point out negatives, I'll say that the movie does drag a lot in the middle. All the stuff with Thomas exploring and finding Great Waterton at the beginning is great, all the stuff at the end is awesome. But the middle parts where Thomas is just sad and moping around are very dull. And I'll be honest, I don't care for Stanley that much. He was fine, I guess, but overall not too special. He was more of just a plot device to make Thomas feel unappreciated, which is fine for this story, I guess, but I just didn't think he was too much of a standout. He didn't really have a unique personality of his own. Perhaps if they did more in the show with him following this, I'd feel different, but yeah, not a huge fan of him. The Great Discovery is a wonderful goodbye to the model era of Thomas, and I can't imagine anyone who is a fan of the props would dislike this movie. Just for all the model stuff alone, this is a very fun watch. It's a movie I'm very happy to place in my top 5. B+. Number 4. I love Tale of the Brave. This is the first movie on this list I will flat out say that I love. Every pick from here on out are all in the great tier. Tale of the Brave is a movie about the show's 3 main characters, Thomas, Percy, and James. This isn't a Thomas movie, or a Percy movie, or a James movie. No, it's a movie about all 3 of them and their friendship together. The movie is split pretty evenly into 3 sections that are all woven together very tightly. The first part is mostly about Thomas and his adventure at the clay pits that sets up the story. The second part is mostly about Percy and him dealing with his fears. And the third part is about James and the culmination of all his actions to Percy. Throughout the course of the movie, each one goes through a huge character arc. Thomas's big arc is learning to have faith in his friends. Thomas is sort of the detective character here, trying to uncover the truth of some big footprints at the clay pits. Evidence and logic keep piling up, so when Percy says he actually saw a monster, Thomas is inclined to not believe him, and shafts him in front of everyone. He later realizes he was wrong to do this. Percy's big arc is overcoming his fears. When Percy hears about the footprints at the clay pits, he keeps getting ideas in his head that monsters are amuck on Sodor. He turns into a nervous wreck later when he actually sees a monster, or what he thinks is a monster anyway. But with Gator's advice, he learns to overcome it and ends up being a pretty big badass in the climax. James's big arc is learning not to be such an instigator. When James hears about Percy's fears, he finds great fun in teasing the poor guy. He creates the fake monster to scare Percy, which works, and then follows him later to the clay pits where he gets dragged into the climax and gets the bejesus scared out of him. All of their arcs develop so naturally and conclude perfectly in the movie's final scene, where they all apologize and level the playing field. Their friendships with each other are also interweaved here. We see all three of the dynamics on full display. You have Thomas and Percy's best friend dynamic, of course, which is actually challenged here. James teases Percy and they banter, and Thomas and James often argue because Thomas is usually trying to talk sense into him. The new characters in this are fun. I don't dislike any of them. Gator's a good character, although I wish his reason for being on Sodor was explained. And I love that fan favorites like Bill and Ben and Cranky all have some time in the limelight too. Especially Cranky, who has probably the most strenuous scene in the whole movie. It is a silly scene. Like, what on earth did Cranky think was going to happen? But it just shows how far he'd be willing to go for the little engines he claims he doesn't like. Under all his gruff, Cranky has a pretty big heart. I love this. A common criticism I see of this movie is that it drags a little in the middle, which I do agree with. All the exciting stuff is at the beginning and the end, and the middle is very dialogue heavy. I'm personally okay with this here though. Every good movie needs slow moments where its characters just talk and have dialogue. Most of the crucial character development stuff here are in these dialogue scenes. If the whole movie was crazy antics and fast-paced sequences with no stakes, then we'd have like a Great Race here or a Bwubba. The only thing I really do not like about this movie is that stupid song at the end. Like, the movie ends on such a wonderful note. All of the characters are going off together as Gator's ship sails into the sunset. The music is beautiful, the emotional beat hit. Everything about this scene is great. And then BAM! Ah, no! It was so good! Why did you ruin the moment? Apparently, this was not the song composer Robert Hartshorn wanted to use at the end. He was going to use an elongated version of the guitar song earlier in the movie. But Mr. Mattel stepped in and was like, we need a catchy pop song here. No slow emotional stuff because that's too boring. Ugh. There's another moment that kind of bothers me. There's a really fast tone shift mid-scene right after the landslide sequence, and it's very jarring. Like, the landslide was really tense and serious, right? And Percy basically almost died. Then right after that completes, Marion catches the rock, and then the tone immediately switches to lighthearted. Like, in seconds, we went from this to this.
Oh, alas, poor dinosaur.
Like, what the hell? Why did the tone change? Why is no one stunted by the fact the clay pits was just decimated? This part is kind of bizarre, and I wonder if it was quickly rewritten in the 11th hour to not be dour. Tale of the Brave is such a sneaky movie. It markets itself as an exciting adventure movie about monsters or whatever. You go in expecting to see the gimmick of the week, but instead get a wonderful character study of the series' three mains. It's so heartwarming, so down to earth. Really, this movie would have made for a fantastic series finale, and part of me wishes it was. If I were to choose what I want in a perfect finale for the whole show, I don't think I'd stray too far off from what Tale of the Brave did here. A-. Number 3. So it probably seems blasphemous not putting this in the number 1 spot, huh? Don't get me wrong, The Adventure Begins is astounding. It does so much right. So what is this movie exactly, and why do the fans go crazy over it? The Adventure Begins is a retelling of the original Thomas stories for the 70th anniversary of the Railway series. All the stories from the first 2 books were strung together to form one big narrative about Thomas's first days on the island of Sodor. 2015 was such a good year, man. Thomas was in such a good place then. Seeing these stories being retold in a modern fashion with the CGI characters and voice cast was so surreal when this was new. The fact something like this exists still blows my mind to this day. Just like Hero of the Rails, so much was changed about the established lore to make this narrative work. Thomas now arrives way after everyone else instead of helping him build the railway with Edward so that he could be the underdog character. James is now painted black instead of always being red from the very start. And Henry having an old shape is no longer a thing. This kind of stuff would really bug me, just like Hero's backstory, but I fully accept this as the CGI timeline's take on the origin story. It's mostly the same, but just like the CGI timeline as a whole, it takes a lot of its own creative liberties. Let's talk about the score for this. The score of the movie utilizes all the classic themes from the first season, all rearranged to match this era's style of music. This was probably the biggest surprise of all on first viewing. I remember watching, already being blown away with what I was seeing, only for it to fade to a scene of Gordon traveling, and then from the background came that do 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 do, and I was like, no way. No way! Oh my god, it's the music I know! And throughout the movie, other themes crept in. I would still think the movie is good, even if the music wasn't there. But the fact they bothered to recreate the original score was icing on the cake. It's amazing. The way they tie all the stories together too to create a flowing narrative is very clever. It doesn't feel segmented into a bunch of different B-plots like King of the Railway. This actually feels like a solid narrative, building as it goes. The fact every story appears in the exact order as they did in the Railway series is so cool to me. Edward and Gordon is first, then Sad Story of Henry, and then all of Thomas's stories. Using Edward and Gordon as a means of introducing all the characters before Thomas arrives was super clever, and framing Sad Story of Henry as a flashback being told to Thomas to introduce him, and the audience, to Henry, was so smart. Doing it this way keeps Thomas subtly still active in the plot without having to cut away from him. They didn't cut away from an A plot to use a Henry B plot, instead it's being told to Thomas by another character, so Thomas's involvement is still there. Just brilliant. Everything about this movie works so well, except for one element. And that element is pretty important. It's the characters. My biggest and only issue with The Adventure Begins is the characters, which contradicts my review of the movie from several years ago. I'm aware, opinions change. The characters here are somewhat tainted by their CGI-era Flanderizations. Henry is the token one, whose entire backstory is changed to suit his CGI persona. He didn't stay in the tunnel because he was vain and didn't want his paint to get wet. No, now it's because he was literally scared of the rain. In fact, he's petrified of it. He's a big ol' scaredy cat. I don't like this change. And I know the only reason they did it was just so they could have a scene where Thomas helps Henry overcome his fear. It was a change made so Henry could be more active in the story and connect him back to Thomas more. It's kinda clever, I guess, and I get why they did it. They just wanted all the characters to be touched by Thomas in some way. But Henry's character suffers as a result. Thomas, I also take some issue with. While he is still very lovable in this movie, don't get me wrong, I feel like they missed the point of his arc in the original stories. In the original Thomas the Tank Engine book, Thomas was a prick. He was cheeky, rude, impatient, and thought he was better than everyone else. He played tricks on the engines because he was a little shithead and thought he could get away with it. But over the course of the book, his incidents humble him, and by the end he's matured so much that he does a very adult thing and rescues James after he crashes. His reward at the end feels earned because Thomas's arc was so complete. He was a good role model. In The Adventure Begins, Thomas is portrayed as a nice guy from the very start, super eager to work and happy to be there. He's portrayed more so as clumsy and silly now, rather than rude and cheeky. So when the arc completes, and he gets his branch line, it doesn't feel as deserved. Like, well done, you worked on the railway for a week and you did what you were supposed to do. You get a whole branch line now. If I were James, I'd be so pissed when I found out. The character stuff is my only problem with the movie, and that's why it's in the number 3 spot and not higher. It delivers on literally everything else. The music slaps, the emotional beats hit, all the callbacks and winks to fans feel very celebratory. This is a brilliant starting point for anyone new to Thomas, kid or a new adult fan. It's a wonderful introduction to the universe. As a celebration of the 70th anniversary of the series, they really did an outstanding job with this. Every fan, whether Railway Series purist or a brand new newcomer, will get something out of it. There's something in this movie for everyone. The Adventure Begins gets a solid A. Well, we're down to 2 now, and if you've been following, you know which 2 these are. Which one is going to be the second best? And which one the best? Am I gonna pick it? Am I really going to pick that one? The suspense is killing me. Number 2 on this list is both of them. What? Okay, hear me out. I'm going to make a case for both of these movies being the best ever. Sodor's Legend of the Lost Treasure deserves to be the best movie because it is everything a fan could want in a Thomas movie. It's fan service galore with so many returning characters. I love everything about it. The full orchestral score is amazing. The darker tone is a welcome change. The cinematography is jaw-dropping. The shot of Sailor John underwater with that red light behind him, oh my god, astounding. And coupled with that soundtrack, God almighty! They didn't have to go so hard for a Thomas the Tank Engine movie, but yet they did. They pulled all the stops for this one. This is the closest Thomas has ever been to an actual cinematic film. Writer Andrew Brenner took very obscure passing mentions in Railway Series lore and crafted a whole movie plot out of them. Those being the proposed extension to Harwick and smugglers using the cave system near Arlesborough to hide stolen goods. That's incredible. Imagine if I told you 10 years ago there would be a Thomas movie using the concept of the Standing Stones at Kildane. You'd think I was nuts. And yet, this exists. And with that setting, they pulled out everything key to that area of Sodor and made it important to the plot. The Little Western Gang plays a pretty big part, including Donald and Douglas. Arlesborough Harbor is a key location. And of course, the miniature Arlesdale engines, who made their big debut in the show in this. All stuff that only the fans care about, and it's all given the spotlight. I can't talk about Lost Treasure without mentioning its human villain. Sorry Diesel 10, you are not Thomas's most threatening villain. Sailor John is. The fact the villain is a human is what makes him so threatening. An anthropomorphic machine is virtually powerless when it comes face to face with what a human can do. John actually whacks Thomas in the face with an oar, and then attempts to blow him up with dynamite. This guy is ruthless. It's not sugar-coated at all. I love it. Did I also mention that this character is voiced by actor legend John Hurt? This was John Hurt's last major voice role in a film prior to his death in 2017. And man, does he really give it his all here.
Museum? What museum? I haven't been searching all this time to see that treasure end up in a museum! So long, Thomas! It's been a blast! No! Saint me!
I also think this is the only movie on this entire list that gets Thomas totally correct. Thomas is full-on classic Thomas here. I've seen some people criticize the movie because Thomas is too dicky, but like, that's Thomas's true character, and it always has been. As I just said in the Adventure Begins section, Thomas's character is a cheeky prick. The modern years have really neutered him and made him too nice. So seeing his original persona on full display here was so welcome. Yeah, he's grown some since the early days of course, but he still gets a big head from time to time. It was like that in the Railway series too. He causes his own problems here because of his own carelessness, and his arc is overcoming them and proving himself once again. I love how this is reinforced by the symbolism with his number 1. When Thomas is all high and mighty, it's totally exposed as normal, but then after he screws up and falls into the cavern, he gets all scraped up and dirty and the 1 isn't visible anymore. symbolizing how low he's fallen with Topham. Then after he proves himself a hero, the sea he falls into washes his side and the One becomes visible again. Super clever. In a weird way, this is a bit of a perfect sequel to The Adventure Begins, where Thomas is given his number 1 and his branch line. And then in this movie, they both get taken away. And both movies came out the same year. I wonder if that was intentional or not. Some people say Sir Topham Hatt is too harsh to Thomas in this, but I think that was the point. This is supposed to be the movie where Topham gets the most pissed he's ever been at Thomas. Thomas really screwed up earlier and Topham was furious with him. Then he screws up majorly again, twice in the same day. So when Topham sees an explosion and then sees Thomas at the scene, can you really blame him for being so instantly upset? I think I would be too in this scenario. As a result, this is one of the few times in the entire CGI era Sir Topham Hatt feels like a force to be reckoned with. He is not a joke in this movie, he's an actual authority figure. And for me personally, that was a nice breath of fresh air, considering the season right before this, they were doing stuff like this with him.
1, 2. Oh, great fun. Oh, not again.
The only thing I don't think worked as well as it could have in this was Ryan. Don't get me wrong, I like Ryan, and I think what they do with him in the show after this is very fun. But in this movie, I feel like Ryan's a bit out of place. I wish they had stuck to their original plan of having Ryan being a bit more confident, sort of douchey character. He would have been more interesting that way, a stronger contrast to Thomas, and would have made more sense for Thomas to feel threatened by him and not like him. But instead, they opted to make him a more happy, generic, likable guy. This is something that only came to me on my latest rewatch. The reason I wish they did this is because it would have aided the mystery of the story better. When Sailor John is introduced, there's some dark undertones and it's pretty clear in the moment that he's the villain. But then in the next few scenes with him, they try to subvert it and play him off as a nice guy to keep the audience guessing. This part of the movie falls a little flat for me because we know he's going to be the villain later. There's no other character it could be. If you had Ryan be kind of douchey during these parts of the film to offset it, then it really could have gone either way. John could have been the nice guy for all we know, and Ryan could have been the antagonist the whole time with his own secret agenda, and Thomas was right to not like him. Without a mean sort of character to counteract the fake nice guy persona they give John, it's just too obvious he's going to end up being the villain, so these subversion scenes fall a little flat. But that's it! Ryan is my only criticism, and that's basically a nitpick, because the movie still works fine as it is. I adore Lost Treasure because it didn't feel like it was playing down to kids in any regard. They were in full-on, let's make a kick-ass movie mode with this, and they absolutely delivered that. This is where CGI Thomas peaked in my opinion. It never got better than this. Lost Treasure is a borderline masterpiece when it comes to Thomas movies, and I highly recommend all fans, old and new, to check it out. But who am I kidding? I'm sure all of you watching already have. A+. Blue Mountain Mystery deserves to be the best movie because it simply does everything right. Everything about this movie is correct. All of the characters are totally correct. There is no huge out-of-character moments or inconsistencies. They are all dead on perfect. The plot of this movie is that while Paxton is away after an accident, Thomas goes and works in his place at the Blue Mountain Quarry with the narrow gauge engines, and he gets sucked into a big conspiracy while he's there. I can't not talk about the narrow gauge engines in this, so let's cover them first. This was their big return to the series after being absent for several years. The fact that most of them had starring roles in this is amazing to me. Considering the narrow gauge engines are deemed unmarketable by Mattel and are restrained from appearing on screen often now, it really is amazing a whole movie was allowed where they make up the main cast of it. Because they are so obscure, their inclusion makes the mystery aspect of the story work very well. These are characters that are all hidden from the main goings-ons of Sodor up in the mountains. Of course they have their own secrets the main cast wouldn't know about. There was such a clear effort to try and undo what the previous seasons had done with them. No longer is Skarloey the wimpy, idiotic child character he regressed into. No, now he's back to being the older, wiser, confident leader of the pack, complete with a deep man voice.
Marvelous!
I love it. I don't like how the Blue Mountain Quarry basically became the only location we ever see these guys appearing again following the movie, but regardless, I still think their role in the movie is wonderful. Let's talk about Thomas's role in this. Thomas is played perfectly as the POV character for the audience. He's the main character, but the story is not about him. Thomas is the Nick Carraway of this movie. That's the main character in The Great Gatsby for you youngins. The real story here is about Luke and Victor. All of that is just happening around him, and we, the audience, are all experiencing it happen in real time through Thomas's point of view. I love that so much. Thomas isn't exactly interesting in this type of scenario, so having him take on this sort of observer role was very appropriate. And as a result, you end up rooting for him when he finds out the truth of the matter and pieces all the clues together. Now let's talk about Victor. Victor may be my favorite part of the whole movie. This movie dives really deep into his backstory. Victor had been a character in the show for about 4 years by this point. That's usually about the length of time a new character stops appearing. Take someone like, I don't know, Timothy, for instance. He was only around for like 2 seasons before he disappeared. They didn't have to do this. They easily could have introduced some new character to fill Victor's role. But no, someone made the decision to instead use an existing character and beef them up. And that is a decision I truly respect. It's stuff like this that makes me happy I continue to invest time in this show and these characters. We learn all about where he came from before Sodor, what he used to look like, how we didn't speak English. He became so much more interesting. And it's this movie that made him one of my favorites from the CGI era. The same can be said for Paxton. Before this, literally just a background character that never spoke. Yet for some reason they decided to give him a major role and a personality that's totally unique to him. And look at that, Paxton's now a fan favorite. I love Paxton. He also feels like such a natural addition to the Thomas family. With all these obscure characters taking center stage here, the main characters are all reduced to a single scene. And they made sure that single scene with them was impactful. Thomas asked them all what is the worst thing that they've ever done, and they each recall incidents from the past, complete with CGI recreations of old episodes. Again, just like Hero of the Rails, the mains are all a unit that confide in each other here. I really like that. The pacing is seamlessly perfect. I think this is the perfect Thomas film when it comes to pacing. It's not slow and dull like Day of the Diesels or something, and it's not trying to do too much and be too fast like The Great Race. It has one solid narrative with no B-story, and every scene builds upon the previous. There is no fat to be trimmed from this film at all. Everything that happens for a reason. The only hints of a B-story, which are the 2 scenes of Rheneas complaining about his paint, even those pay off at the end in the post-credits scene. It's a silly joke, but hey, they set it up earlier and paid it off. Some people say the scene where the narrow gauge engines get mad at Thomas and leave him is out of character, but I totally disagree. They made it very clear earlier in the film that the situation was dire. They were trusting Thomas with their secret because Luke's life was on the line, as far as they were aware. When Thomas blurts out that he told Victor,
"What did you do?"
and then right after the devil himself enters the quarry, I do not blame them for getting so upset. Thomas broke their trust. For the right reasons, of course, but they didn't know that. Sure, they could have stopped to listen to him, but they were angry. People act irrationally when they get angry. Don't believe me? Just go look at Twitter. I do admit Thomas going up on the incline winch was a bit silly, but let's be real, guys. Every climax in every single movie on this list is silly. I, of course, always champion realism with this show, but as long as the climax is exciting and the story builds up to it, then I can allow my suspension of disbelief to swivel. If there's anything negative to say about this, it's the use of the narrator. They could have used him a lot less, but it's so clear they improved since the previous film because they cut down the pointless dialogue a lot, but just not enough. So I'm not even going to knock them for that, because they clearly improved from the last movie. I think this movie works as well as it does is because of Andrew Brenner. Sharon Miller wrote the script and Brenner edited it. This is the only time in the whole series this has been done. Blue Mountain Mystery is such a unique film in that regard, having two creative voices behind it. Usually that's a recipe for disaster, but somehow Blue Mountain just works. I don't know if it's obvious to anyone else, but to me it's pretty clear which scenes were Brenner additions. The Annie and Clarabelle scenes feel 100% Brenner to me. Really, this movie deserves to be the #1 spot because this feels like a Thomas movie in all elements. Lost Treasure is absolutely wonderful, but it sort of feels like they were trying a bit too hard to be epic, if that makes sense. Blue Mountain Mystery is just a perfect Thomas story that fits seamlessly in the realm of the universe. It's not trying too hard to be epic, it just is what it is, and it feels right. A+. So there you have it, folks. When it comes to the #1 spots, I think it's a matter of what you personally are looking for in a Thomas movie. If you're looking for a movie that has never before touched Railway series concepts, beautiful visuals, an amazing orchestral score, a unique and threatening villain, and tries to be the biggest event ever, then Lost Treasure is probably for you. If you're looking for a more down-to-earth and streamlined story with no B-plots, perfect pacing, an incredibly unique palette of characters, and expands on already existing characters, then Blue Mountain Mystery is probably more up your alley. It basically comes down to how epic you prefer your Thomas films dialed up to. I love both of these movies, so I seriously can't choose. Right now, I think I'm leaning more towards Lost Treasure, but in 6 months, I'll probably be on another Skarloey kick and think Blue Mountain is the best one. Either way, they are both wonderful, and there's very little wrong with either. After revisiting all of these, my final conclusion here is that there is absolutely no consistency in quality across these movies. One year they'll put out the best thing ever, and then the next year it's a mediocre cash grab. It's pretty crazy that of the 14 movies here, I only really love 4 of them. I like others, but I wouldn't say I love them. I don't think it's a hot take to say that the majority of the Thomas films are just okay. That being said, I do miss the annual movies though. Not for the movies themselves, but for the hype leading up to premiere day. The best days in the Thomas fandom were when everyone was getting excited about what the newest big installment would have in store for us. And when the movies ended up being really good, the fandom celebrated. Last year, they announced a new theatrical Thomas movie was in the works, being directed by Mark Forster. We know absolutely nothing about it as of right now, and nothing has been confirmed in months. I'd like to see this actually happen, but something tells me they're waiting to see how the reboot performs come in October. Who knows what will happen, but my hopes are not too high right now. This was an incredibly long video, but I hope you all enjoyed it. I'll see you all in the next one, folks. Bye! Bye-bye!